My name is Shirin Neshat. I'm a visual artist and a filmmaker. I started with still photography and quickly moved to video installations. And then at some point I moved towards cinema. I've made 3 feature films and I'm working on directing operas. Through my life and my work, the greatest inspiration for me have been Iranian women. And I think part of that is my own struggle as a woman alone in a foreign country and the issues that I had to deal with, the struggles, but also the need to survive. And I think that in many ways, I have looked at Iranian women in the way that they've always been cornered one way or another by various governments, but they've always been survivors, oppressed but survivors and rebellious. And I think that's been the greatest inspiration for me as a woman. I grew up in a middle upper class family in a very conservative religious town in Iran. And yet my father and my mother were not religious. So we lived a double life in a way. I always felt very conflicted between these 2 worlds. These emotions that built inside of me when I was young led to the kind of art that I make. This was back in 1995. My work is about my own experiences and emotions. This idea of displacement, being an outcast, being an outsider, living inside yourself. When I look back at my arrival to the US, I felt the same sense of displacement. I came in the late 70s. At the age of 17, the revolution happened a few years later. So that basically changed everything. I was pretty much disconnected from the rest of my family for a long time to come. In 1990, I took my young son and finally returned. I got to see my family after 11 years. I found this obsession of reconnecting and not wanting to let go. Making art was a way of maintaining a connection with my country. I started with photography. I made these very provocative images of the woman of Allah. The integration text over the image comes from my interest in Persian and Islamic art and architecture. The subjects are very contemporary about the revolution, but the style and the technique goes back to something very ancient and classical. A lot of people thought that these were religious texts, but they were always poetry that were written by Iranian women, and some of the poems actually were what instigated the image itself. I came to understand how much my family had suffered. Iran underwent a major transformation since the revolution into a very strict religious country. All the women with the black veil, including my own family, even though the women seem very silent and passive on the surface, there's so much they want to say, and that is expressed through calligraphy. I always had a love affair with the moving picture. At the very first small exhibition I had, I even experimented with Super 8 and video. And the videos became like short poems, and the movies became a story. Soliloquy stemmed from my own experience as an Iranian in the US. And it's the only video that I've been in. The main role was an Iranian woman that was deeply conflicted between the 2 realms. I am the silhouette that doesn't quite blend in the US or in Iran. Those 2 worlds are colorful, and I'm the only one that is in black. But it's always been the same way about me and Iran. My work has always been relating to Iran or in the Middle East, but Land of Dreams addresses United States. this work is the most complex in terms of trying to make a project that is simultaneously still photography, video, and a feature-length film. For me, still photography is always about creating human portraiture, because I find human expressions endlessly interesting. No matter how many millions of times it's been recreated. And I like the idea of that frozen moment and creating an experience for the audience that is so instant, so immediate. But with the moving picture comes the art of storytelling and the use of music, choreography, performance, all helping to create a mood that seduces the audience in a very, very different way than a photograph could. The story of Aida is about an Ethiopian princess who is now a slave in Egypt, but consequently she has fallen in love with the very man who will be the commander-in-chief of attacking her country. And of course he doesn't know that. Really the whole story is about the plan to conquer Ethiopia, while Aida is sort of observing their strategy, and eventually they conquer Ethiopia, and to her shock she sees her own father and people being arrested and eventually killed. It's a deeply political but highly emotional story of love and of compassion, yet extremely brutal story of war and corruption and fanaticism. And the last thing I want to say, it feels so extremely relevant to the moment that we live in today. So my work is always about some forms of contradictions, opposite, paradoxes, women who are submissive and oppressed and under great pressure, but women are very powerful, very vocal, and so there's a lot of duality in my work. There's always this conflict between what your rational mind says, what your conscious mind says, versus what your irrational and your subconscious mind wants. And I'm very interested in that, and how every one of us are always inundated in and divided between our more emotional and yet rational minds. And I think this just makes the story more complicated and more complex. It's really shocking how in the opera of Aida, the most brutal characters are the church, the priest. And it's not just Islam, it's not only where I come from. And fanaticism is become a greatest threat in our modern time. And sometimes it nourishes the people who are governing, who are governments. So now today, as you can see everywhere, in Iran, in Israel, even in the US, it's very difficult to separate religion from the ruling party. I couldn't emphasize enough about how timeless I think the story of Aida is, and how universal it is. And I think, unlike people who have seen the more traditional, conventional Aida and their perception that is about the other world, it's about ancient Egypt and Ethiopia, it really isn't. It's about right here. And I really think that, I really hope that this new edition of Aida will remind people of the power of Verdi, his music, but the complexity of the story, and how a masterpiece could go on for centuries and be relevant. And I feel incredible honor to have been given this opportunity to get my hands into the story and to find myself over the years in Aida.